Welcome back everyone, this is our last video of the module, video 5. And in it we're going to take a look at some of my most recent data stories at the pudding. We'll talk through each project, show how each uses some of the techniques that you've learned about in the previous videos. We're also going to take a look at kind of why it's important to experiment, and then we're going to look at some of our failed projects. First up, this piece that you've seen probably several times or heard about several times in this video or this module is women's pocket sizing. So this is important because the project started with a single question. Why are women's pockets so bad? And that's because Amber and I were, trying to fit our phones in our pockets, almost dropped mine on the streets of New York, and we realized that so many other women are equally as frustrated with this phenomenon. We took the idea back to our male colleagues and they were like, yeah, I don't know about this. I think it's one of those things that all women know about. It's a water is wet thing. They said the story was too obvious. But we kept pushing and we said, no, I think there's something there. So in this piece, it employs one of our kind of signature things at the pudding, scrolly telling, starts out with that and walks you through kind of our process. We hand measured 80 pairs of blue jeans. We went out to the stores and measured them. And we found the average size for both the men and the women's pockets and then compared them, showing that on average, pockets in women's jeans are 48% shorter and 6.5 narrower than men's pockets. This piece uses animation too, in kind of conjunction with that storytelling, to really walk the reader through step by step. After that, we kind of walk through this interactive part where you can click on different things that you would normally fit in your pocket, say your iPhone, and find out the percentage of pockets that we measured that could fit that item. That's 40% women's pockets. If we look at a front wallet, 40% of women's pockets also fit that. A pen, that's 98% of women's pockets. A woman's hand, which you would think that your hand is supposed to fit in your pocket, but only 10% of women's hands can actually fit in women's pockets. Through those filters, we're also showing the different brands that we found that could fit your specific item. In this case, we're looking at a women's hand. And this just gives the reader a little bit more information. If they're looking for a specific brand, you can filter or sort. All 80 pairs of jeans. Yes, we measured each one. Then we kind of break into this section where we answer a few questions for people. We knew that people would have additional questions, and so we said, okay, well, what about different styles? Is there a difference between skinny and straight fit? And the average is, not so much. And then what about back pockets? Women's jeans are not as lacking in the back pocket department. We wrap our women's pockets piece with a little bit of history. In that, women's pockets have really been an issue for several centuries. And in fact, famed fashion designer Christian Dior in the 1950s said that men have pockets to keep things in, women for decoration. The entire design of this pockets piece is really evocative of denim itself. There's a lot of pieces that are look like stitching with dashed lines. There's yellow and red tags that are really symbolic of kind of the iconic Levi's tag on the back pocket of jeans. So the design really just pulls you into the subject matter. We've also included some whimsical elements or Easter eggs, and in that our pocket in the piece at the top of it, if you click on it, it actually reveals this poem called Dangerous Coats by Sharon Owens that suggests that women's pockets could potentially be dangerous because we might be carrying seditious or improper materials in them. The other thing that I should note about the Pockets project is that if we scroll back down through it, you'll notice that there are no traditional charts in this piece. The entirety of the viz is Pockets itself. And Amber and I intentionally did that because we wanted it to feel like Pockets. We wanted the Pockets to speak for themselves. And so we didn't feel like there was any additional bar graphs or line graphs that would make that argument stronger for us. The next project that I want to take you through is the rise of hyphenated names in pro sports. And this is a project that I put out in May of this year. Again, like most of our projects at The Pudding, it started with a central question. This time I was watching an NFL game featuring the player Clinton Dix. And his last name was emblazoned on the back of his jersey, and it kind of arched over his numbers because it was so long. And it really got me thinking, I feel like I've seen a lot more hyphenated names on jerseys recently. So after that initial question, I went hunting for the data. And I pulled it from prosportsreference.com for leagues like Major League Baseball and the NBA and Major League Soccer. And then created this heat map of players with hyphenated last names by decade. You can clearly see the trend that, yes, in fact, hyphenated last names are increasing. The most so in the NBA, and then in the WNBA, because women are often asked to hyphenate their names instead of taking a male's name in marriage, the WNBA stands out as kind of the outlier of all the leagues that I looked at. This was one of those stories that started with that big to small narrative, and the fact that the first visual that you come to is kind of this overarching view, and then it slowly gets a little bit more specific. The next visual you come to is this kind of wall of names idea. And I had tried a lot of different ways to visualize this with more traditional charts, but like Pockets, I felt like the subject matter made for the most striking data presentation itself. The first thing that caught my eye with this story was those hyphenated names on the back of jerseys. And I wanted to be able to see those names, and I wanted the audience to be able to see those names in the data. So this creates like a slider or an animation to kind of take you back through decade by decade of each of the names with hyphens. And then you can also filter by league and see kind of how that plays out in all of the different sports. As we scroll down, you can see that there's a ton of names, just a few, only 14 hyphenated in the NFL in the 2000s. But the story gets even more specific. So from the leagues, we get into the region or the reasons why people hyphenate their names. And through this, I look at kind of players that are vignettes or symbolize some of the reasons. So for BenJarvus Green-Ellis, it would be that he combined his parents' last name. And for Skylar Diggins-Smith of the WNBA, she married and combined names with her spouse. This is another project like Pockets that, if we scroll back up through it, there are no traditional charts in it. And that's again because I'm really letting the data and the story dictate the form instead of trying to fit kind of a preconceived notion of what a chart should be into this piece. The last piece we're going to take a look at is one called Colorism in High Fashion. And Amber and I at The Pudding worked at the story along with a freelancer, Malika Honda, and she looked at 19 years of Vogue covers to see how Vogue represents women of all shades. She used machine learning to identify female faces, and then used a tool to filter out that background. Here we're using the scrolling telling method to kind of walk you through this step by step. She averaged the color for those pixels that she identified, and then removed any information about the color's hue or saturation, leaving us an idea with the light or darkness value for that color. This piece in particular has two places where it's kind of scrolly tails. And the second one you get to is this with this bee swarm chart. And it kind of takes you through what the data looks like from darkest shade to lightest shade, and then transforms to another dimension by time. Then it takes you through the different periods of kind of Vogue's skin tone range of its models. Between 2000 and 2005, it's definitely a tighter grouping. There's less distribution. That does increase as kind of, we get closer to present day. And then we switch to the faces here. And we did that because the faces of the models are a little bit more recognizable with their skin tones. But we wanted to use that animation to provide some object constancy there, to set you up for the faces. To say, here's the skin tone, and then here's the faces in the exact same spot, so that the readers could make that connection. One thing that we, weren't really kind of expecting when we looked at this data was a big reveal that even though Vogue's the skin tones of cover models have gotten more diverse, that spectrum has fanned out. Really, a lot of it comes down to one model, and that's Lupita Nyong'o. Here we look at kind of the 5 darkest cover models, where 3 of those are Nyong'o herself, and then we compare that to the 5 lightest cover models, which have 5 distinct faces. This project is one of those that's kind of gets into a lot of our what we do best at the pudding. And that is to take a kind of cultural look at a topic that has a little bit more underneath the surface. We can call it like an iceberg, where you're just getting the tip of content, and then we're using this Vogue CoverGirl story to talk about issues like colorism and racism and tokenism. Or sometimes we call it like the spoonful of sugar approach, where we're giving giving the readers, meeting them where they are, a topic that seems non-controversial or non-intimidating in the idea of Vogue covers, and then taking them through kind of a deeper topic through that process. So now that you've seen kind of 3 projects at the pudding, you know that they all have their own distinct look and feel. A lot of them do use the technique of scrollytelling. Some of them don't have traditional charts at all. But most of them, have a little bit of fun with them. And it's important to us to really kind of embrace the idea of experimentation. Again, at the pudding, we're not bound by the news cycle or harsh deadlines, so we do have the freedom and the privilege to do that in experimentation. But we also kind of want to remind people who are possibly in those more stressful or time-constrained jobs why experimentation is important. So first, if no one broke the rules, DataViz would be boring. It would all look the same. You wouldn't be able to tell one chart from the other. It keeps the readers and us interested. It's equally important that the people behind the story, that's us, that's you, DataViz practitioners, are learning and engaged with the story just as much as it is the audience. Experimentation also doesn't limit the storytelling by the delivery. It makes sure that the right form for the story takes shape. It doesn't constrain you, and it doesn't force you to try to fit a square peg into a round hole. And finally, experiments add to the whole industry's toolkit. It means that we can do lots of different things. It means that we challenge each other, that we increase kind of our definition of what data journalism and data storytelling can be. And it means that we try new things and engage with our readers more. But how do you know when to break the rules? It's often a fine line that's kind of hard to distinguish. We're going to try. So let's talk about when to break the rules. First is there a better way to tell the story? You know, going back to that don't fit the square peg in a round hole idea. Don't try to constrain yourself with the current definition of data storytelling. We want to always make sure that we're pushing that boundary to keep redefining what data storytelling can be. It's also a little bit more okay to break the rules if the story is more lighthearted. I touched on this a little bit in an earlier video, but experimentation is often much harder when you're dealing with serious topics. You know, you want to treat those stories with the type of integrity and respect that they deserve, and sometimes trying to break the rules or trying to play it a little bit more fun is not the safest bet with those type of stories. It's also okay to break the rules when you're working or looking for a connection with the reader. You know, ultimately, again, our job is to communicate information, and that job is made much easier when you have a strong connection with the reader. So if there's a way that you can evoke nostalgia or another kind of really strong emotion in the reader, it's okay to kind of break and bend the rules then too. On the other side, you know, you want to follow the rules when you're at risk of deceiving the reader. Often, people take graphics and data visualization at face value. There's kind of this saying that, like, charts don't lie, words do. But human perception is a powerful thing, and charts can be deceiving. So it's important to always kind of remember the way that you're presenting information. You know, be very careful when kind of breaking axes or creating non-zero baselines. Always use area when doing kind of circle and bubble charts. You really want to kind of adhere to some basic data viz principles so that you don't deceive or confuse the reader. You should also kind of follow some of those rules and principles when they're already heavily established and ingrained patterns. Here I'm thinking about the color blue being associated with Democrats and red being associated with Republicans in the United States. Historically, the colors weren't always this way, but right now they're synonymous with the two parties. If you switch them so that Republicans were blue and Democrats were red, you'd cause major confusion. And again, that's one thing that you don't want to do with your stories, is cause confusion. Sometimes people kind of have a similar argument when we're talking about the colors blue for boys or pink for girls. And, you know, feminist data viz has kind of really embraced the idea that girls don't always have to be pink. And that's true. But we shouldn't do the reverse. We shouldn't all of a sudden make girls blue and boys pink. We should choose colors that aren't associated or aren't kind of, you know, heavily ingrained in people's minds with those categories. So, for instance, girl could be teal and boy could be orange, and that would be safe instead. So because we love experimentation at the Pudding, I want to kind of walk you through a couple of examples of our biggest experiments. The first one I'm going to start with is one called the Gyllenhaal experiment. And this is one by Russell and Matt that took data from Colin Morris, one of our collaborators before, to kind of find how people spell stars' names. And this was an experiment in a couple of different ways. One, the entire visualization is built on reader input. So we don't know what shape that data is going to take until readers answer the quiz. And two, we're prompting users to kind of spell names by listening to audio. So here I'm trying to spell Alanis Morissette's last name. I think I've got it. I'm wrong. And we do this for, you know, several different celebrities, and then we build these Sankey-esque diagrams in which you can kind of see the path at which people split off from their names. For Zooey Deschanel, it's after the second letter. for Zach Galifianakis, people start getting bad at the third letter. One of the most contentious last names to spell was actually Matthew McConaughey. And he had over 800 spelling different variations because he had so many vowels in his name. You can't see all 800 variations here, but because they would take, majority of the screen. But McConaughey, difficult man, difficult name. All right. The next example of kind of an experiment I want to take you through is this project on NBA defensive 3 seconds and how officials and referees call this. This was actually a project that was completely built out in code and then rendered in video. We had done this once before in a project where we partnered with the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, but that was for kind of an exhibit on a big screen. And this one, we really wanted to pare it down and make sure that it was accessible to people off platform, off of our site, on social media. We were thinking specifically Instagram in mind. And we did this project this way because, we realized that a lot of our pieces, a lot of the most kind of big, robust data viz pieces are internet specific. There, you go to a site, you have to be on that site to see them, and we wanted to try to reach a much broader audience with this piece. So we'll keep watching for just a little bit to give you a little bit more idea of what the video looks like. The next experiment we'll take a look at is this one on what the path to fame looks like. Russell and Caitlin mined Wikipedia page views for artists and kind of tracking just how they exploded over time. This is another kind of large experiment website because the entirety of the screen is the chart in itself. So as you scroll down, these different kind of snake charts come into play and trigger with the entire page as the axes. These snake charts or worm charts or smoke puffs, we called them a lot of different things when we were developing them because they were a completely new chart type that Russell did using D3. Where he encoded both color and the width of page views and the height of page views in this one snake chart type. The other thing that we did for this piece is you can see these kind of little counter bubbles that count down on the side of it. There's no leading text on this piece. There are some kind of subtitles in the bottom there, but the piece is completely narrated with audio. And as you scroll, you trigger different audio bits about the content that you're seeing. This was one of those pieces where, because it was so kind of new, that we really needed to make sure that people knew how to consume this piece. So we started out with a little bit more detailed chart on Cardi B's chart, which is the first kind of breakout star. Just kind of walk you through that. That gives you an example of what you're getting into. You can also view this in audio tour form, or you can just say, I'm just browsing, and that kind of takes you out of that kind of hand-holding step. So you're able to experience the article in two different ways. One, on your own, and two, with a guide. And the last experiment that we want to look at is one again by Russell about the craft beer capital of the US. This one at the top says that we're in Austin, Texas, because it's geolocating us, so hi to all you fellow Texans out there. But the thing that we really want to focus in on for the experiment is this section here. And in this section, Russell created this kind of rotating scatter plot here so that users could input what was most important to them when determining what made the craft beer capital of the US. So if it was 100% at quality, you can see that Santa Rosa, California comes out on top. If you wanted a 50-50 split of quality and quantity, you could see that San Diego is your best bet. And if the number of breweries nearby is your most important thing, Denver, Colorado comes out as your top bet for the best city for craft beer. At the pudding, again, it's really important to experiment for us. We experiment a lot, and these are just a handful of experiments that kind of made the cut. But tons of more experiments don't make it, and that's just a process of learning. They're not failures, they're opportunities to learn. And then in kind of our next section, we'll go into a little bit more about the opportunities for learning, as I'll take you through some of our failed projects, or some of the projects that we never hit the publish button on. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the pudding's failures. And failures is a little bit of a difficult word to use, because in a sense they're not failures. Each of these projects has taught us something. We just didn't, the end result wasn't kind of a tangible or shareable experience. And so we think it's important to kind of share this, because for every published story that you see on the pudding, there's at least one story that didn't make the cut. And that just means that the stories that you do see are more refined. We've spent kind of more time learning the lessons and building from our kind of past mistakes to put out something that we're really proud of. So the first story I want to talk about is one that we called Speedruns. And back in October of 2018, Matt and I at the Pudding started looking into world records for video game speedruns. Did you know that you can beat Super Mario Brothers in under 5 minutes? Yeah, we didn't either, so we were intrigued. And we reached out to a guy named Summoning Salt, who owns a few records himself and makes super popular world record video progressions on YouTube. We'll take a look at one on Donkey Kong now.
After Rare made the famous Donkey Kong Country trilogy on the Super Nintendo, they knew they were going to have some big shoes to fill in the future. It's regarded as one of the greatest trilogies of games ever made, and following it up on Nintendo's next console, the Nintendo 64, was not going to be easy. The result was this.
Here we go.
Donkey Kong 64. Reviews came in, and one thing that most critics commented on was the length of the game, with most saying that it took at least 30 hours to get through all of it. When speedrunners today look back at that 30-hour estimate, we laugh.
We got really excited because we thought that there was a data story here, that in addition to these cool videos that Summoning Salt was doing, that we could show it in data. And we were really inspired by a piece we saw on the New York Times about Olympic performance and how that has plateaued. We thought we'd see something similar with speedruns, with the times dropping and dropping until there was no more room to improve. And so I used speedrun.com's API to start collecting the data, and off we went. But those speedrun plateaus looked really different. And we realized that was because with the Olympics, you've already narrowed down the field. You're looking at the best of the best. But anyone could submit a run to speedruns. So the spread of times for beating Super Mario Brothers ranged from that under 5 minute mark to anything like 20 hours. Still, we thought there was something interesting there. So we pivoted and looked at how the records fell over time. We were picturing this as kind of some kind of waterfall chart or drop type of chart. But the more we looked, we realized, okay, 538 did this, and they did it well. they did it about Super Mario, and they did kind of this drop fall chart. So again, we were back to the start. We weren't really sure kind of where this story could go from here. We weren't really sure where the next angle we wanted to take was. So we put a big pause on it and decided that maybe data visualization just wasn't the right medium for the type of story we wanted to tell, or the type of story that we were most interested in. We thought about it harder, and that the Summoning Salt videos were engaging because they showed, video footage of these actual tricks and hacks that people used to speedrun through video games. And we realized that with our data and with the data that was available, we really couldn't compete with that. So for now, we'll leave speedruns to Summoning Salt. The next styled project I want to talk about is one on political fonts. I'm a self-described design nerd. I have a design type tattoo here and one behind my ear. And I was really kind of excited about the idea that Republicans or conservatives would use more serif-based fonts than Democrats. After all, kind of both the party and the font style is more traditionally conservative. And I really, really thought this would be the case, just looking at a handful of logos. So in October 2018, again, because apparently this was the month of my stalled projects, I started to look, and I gathered kind of the 80-ish candidates running for the midterms that year. And the data for kind of by party for percent serif fonts versus percent sans serif fonts was a little bit underwhelming. It still showed that kind of 31% of Democrats used serif fonts, and Republicans used, and 20% of Republicans used serif fonts. But that was the flip side of what I hypothesized. So then I looked at another angle. I was like, well, what if it's not necessarily a bi-party association? Because you have to look through kind of like independents and the libertarians and all these other factors. What if it's kind of an ideological slant? So I looked at how serif fonts appeared in states that voted Democrat in the last presidential election versus states that voted Republican. And that split was kind of even less evident, with about 29% of Democratic states using our Senate candidates having serif fonts, and then about 27% of Senate candidates in Republican states using serif fonts. My initial idea, and kind of one of the big catalysts for it, was that there's been so much talk about kind of how political design has evolved since the Obama election of 2008. In fact, there was an entire 300-page book called Designing Obama that cataloged his creative use of the font Gotham and his O logo, which was kind of the window into America. And so then I thought, okay, well, maybe it's more of a temporal thing. I need to look at this over time to see if I could really find that kind of before Obama, after Obama split. But the data was just hard to come by. There's not a kind of huge repository of a long time frame of all of these political logos. And so I put the project down again because I didn't have enough time to investigate exactly as I wanted to investigate. Since then, there have been a lot of great pieces that kind of look at adjacent things like the color that candidates use. And in fact, politicsanddesign.com now does have a kind of a repository and a catalog of all of the political fonts and logos that we see in society today. And the final project that I want to take a look at is something we called Florida Man. This project has the unique distinction of being dropped twice among our team. The first time, our idea was to look at Florida Man headlines. Florida Man, for a little bit of a backstory, is kind of this mythical, memeable hero, almost like man, of Florida, who basically goes out and does weird things, gets caught in capers, just has very strange things happen to him. And so we wanted to see if Florida Man, or the idea of Florida Man, was more extreme or more different than, say, Illinois Man or California Man. And Ilya and Caitlin began to research this idea and quickly found that Florida's open government laws contributed to the phenomenon of Florida Man. Because Florida's sunshine laws are very open, you can get just about anything you want open on the internet. That includes arrest records. So we could easily get police reports of Florida Man removes all clothes, jumps in a lake with an alligator. But we couldn't get that kind of same detail for states like Illinois or California because their privacy laws and their reporting laws were much more locked down. So after learning this, we stopped investigating the storyline, and the Florida Man story sat on our backlog for quite some time. But just last month, Caitlin and I decided to approach this story from a different angle. This time, we wanted to look at Florida Man headlines and see if we could try to predict what he would do next, creating a calendar for Florida Man's activities. Is Florida Man more likely to do this activity on a Monday or a Tuesday? So we started doing more research and found kind of, a Florida Man headline Twitter feed that we thought that we could pull headlines from. And we were really kind of excited about the possibility of trying to predict Florida Man's actions. But really soon after we did the initial research, an article from the Columbia Journalism Review came out. And in this article, it basically stopped us in our tracks. It made us think about the actual people behind these Florida Man headlines, many of whom struggle with addiction, mental health issues, and homelessness. And we were agreed that we might be falling into kind of the tired, sensational media narrative, and that we weren't treating our data and the people behind it with the compassion and the respect that it deserved. Shortly after the Columbia Journalism Review piece came out, the person who ran that Twitter account on Florida Man ceased his operation because of the same reasoning. And I just want to kind of take a step here that, take a step back and really think about kind of our responsibility as storytellers in the broad sense. And that a lot of times when you're working with data can seem like numbers. It can seem faceless, like you don't have a human connection to it. It can seem like there are no people behind these ones and zeros or these numbers. And that's the exact kind of wrong way to think about data storytelling. You should always remember how the data was collected, who the data speaks to, and who the data is about. Because that will make for, one, just a better story overall, and two, a more responsible and engaged kind of post. So, again, there are lots of reasons that data stories don't work out the way you'd expect them to. The story can be better told in another format. The data doesn't match or back your initial hypothesis, or it's simply not right to tell the story. And again, that doesn't mean you failed. It means you've learned. So that's a wrap. Thanks for hanging out with me this entire course. Hopefully over this module, you've learned a little bit more about data storytelling, what it looks like, what shape it takes, what makes it special, and what our responsibility is as data storytellers. All right, don't forget for your certificate, you need to make sure to participate in the discussion forums and take the quizzes. Also, be sure to check out the Facebook group for this course. If you have any questions for me, post them in the questions for the instructors forum. And if you have any questions related to the course platform, be sure to post those in the questions about the course platform forum. For lots of tasty pudding content, many of the stories that you've seen in this module itself, go to www.pudding.cool. Yes, .com was taken, and we're just that cool. You can also find us on Twitter at puddingviz, or on Instagram at the.pudding. And currently we're doing a lot of cool experiments on Instagram and trying to repurpose our stories into the kind of square format that you see there. So you can check out our stories on our website and then kind of see the reincarnation of them on our Instagram platform. Again, thank you so much for watching. My name is Jan Deem, journalist engineer at The Pudding.